Burden of Innocence, Shaleslip Manor, Book 3. Written by Emmaline Hoffmeister. Dedication. A blind man who sees is better than a seeing man who is blind. Chapter 1. Derbyshire, England, 1802. Gregory Royse was reclining in a leather lounger, reading Delphine and sipping a tumbler of tawny port, when his wife hastened through the door.
"Gregory! Gregory!"
Marjorie's eyes sparkled as she waved a slip of parchment in her hand.
"Mrs. Baxter has safely delivered a healthy girl,"
she said, weaving around the furniture to his side.
"I am going to see the babe and offer my congratulations."
"You are going today?"
"This very moment. Mr. Hartley is bringing round the phaeton as we speak. Will you join me?"
"No, my dear, you go dote on the babe without me. Mrs. Baxter will not be equal to entertaining her landlord during her lying in. I will congratulate Mr. Baxter when I next see him. When should I expect your return?"
"Not for a few hours at least. I plan to hold the baby for as long as Mrs. Baxter allows."
The urge to run straight to the Baxter cottage without waiting for the phaeton struck Marjorie, and it was with some difficulty that she forced herself to remain still and rein in her excitement. Gregory smiled at his fidgeting wife, guessing her thoughts. The expected arrival of the first child, born at Shaleslip Manor since she became mistress, had consumed Marjorie's attention for weeks, nay, months. Her high colour and flushed cheeks revealed her state of exhilaration, a condition Gregory thought heightened her loveliness.
"Take your time and do not forget to be attentive to the new mother as well."
"I will not forget,"
Marjorie promised. She pecked Gregory on the cheek before turning on her heel and hastening towards the door with a lively skip in her step.
"Marjorie, what must a man do to earn a proper kiss?"
Gregory chided with an air of suffering. Marjorie stopped and turned a critical eye on him. His sorrowful frown did not fool her. She recognized the merriment in his dark eyes and chortled when his left eye twitched.
"Gregory, you are shameless. I will indulge you this once, but do not expect me to make a habit of it."
Marjorie returned to his side, sat on his lap and wrapped her arms around him. Then she brought her lips to his neck and kissed him in her favourite spot beneath his earlobe, just above his cravat. The sensitivity of his skin there made him shudder with pleasure.
"Is that better?" she whispered.
"Indeed,"
he said in the deep, husky voice she loved above anything else. Gregory held her tight, encouraging her to continue, but Marjorie refused to fall into his amorous trap. Instead, she laughed and wiggled off his lap and danced out of his reach, evading his grasping hands. When she reached the door, she turned back and looked at him. That twinkle of merriment in his eyes vanished, replaced by an intense gaze, which held a promise to love her with all of his heart forever. She blew him a kiss before exiting. Gregory leaned back against his chair and allowed the sweet sound of Marjorie's laughter to swirl and dissipate around him. She was everything he had ever dreamt of in a wife. Unable to help himself, Gregory laughed. He laughed at himself and his past foolishness. He laughed at the thought of laughing to himself in an otherwise empty room. Most of all, he laughed at the sheer joy he had in his beautiful and amazing wife. He would love Marjorie until the day he died, perhaps even longer.
"Come in, Mrs. Royse,"
Louise said when she opened the door and let Marjorie into the Baxters' home. Louise was a downstairs maid from Shaleslip Manor, on loan to Mrs. Baxter during her confinement and lying in. Her arms were full of blankets, but she rushed to the corner and set them on a chair so she could help Marjorie with the armful of gifts she carried. Marjorie stood just inside the door, while Louise dispensed with the parcels and hung up her coat. She watched with interest as the midwife scrubbed the birthing stool, a wooden contraption which she imagined would be most uncomfortable.
"Mrs. Royse, is that you?"
A tired voice called from behind the curtains, screening the bed.
Yes, Mrs. Baxter, it is me. Please forgive my intrusion, but I had to come when I heard your joyful news. I hope my visit is not unwelcome.
You are always welcome here. I am glad you came. Mr. Baxter and I want you to be the first to know what we named our little angel.
Marjorie moved nearer to the bed and wiped her brow with a delicate handkerchief. The tightly drawn curtains allowed no access to Mrs. Baxter or her new baby and made the stifling cottage feel almost claustrophobic. Marjorie longed to throw open a window, but she feared for the baby's lungs. Marjorie jumped when the curtain drew back with a horrible clatter. Once recovered from her start, she saw a somewhat pale but otherwise healthy Mrs. Baxter and her rosy-faced daughter swaddled in a blanket in her arms. The midwife hissed in disapproval, and Mrs. Baxter rolled her eyes.
Never mind the curtains, Agnes. I never believed in coddling a woman after she gives birth. The air is just the same on one side as it is on the other. Come here, Mrs. Royse, and talk with me.
Mrs. Baxter patted the bed beside her. Agnes, the midwife, sent a withering scowl their way as Marjorie accepted the invitation and sat gingerly on the edge of the straw mattress.
If you disregard the curtains, I must insist you add another blanket.
Agnes grumbled.
I have birthed over 100 babies. I know what I am doing, closing you off from the fresh air. If you take a chill and suffer, you had better not blame me.
The midwife bustled around the bed, tucking the blanket so tightly Mrs. Baxter could not move her legs. Marjorie smiled as she watched an irritated Mrs. Baxter wait with an air of long suffering for the woman to finish.
She is a beautiful child,
Marjorie said as she peered at the small bundle.
She is at that. Do you want to hold her?
I thought you would never ask.
Marjorie reached for the babe. Her stomach fluttered with excitement as she nestled the infant in her arms.
We named her Marge Ann in honor of you and Mr. Royse's mother. We owe much to the Royse family, especially you.
Mrs. Baxter, I am truly touched. I am sure Mr. Royse will also be when he hears how you honor our family.
Marjorie studied the babe's perfection with almost motherly pride.
Hello, little Marge Ann. I am most pleased to make your acquaintance.
Holding her comes naturally to you. I am sure, when your time comes, you will be a wonderful mother,
Mrs. Baxter said.
I hope so. I long to be a mother some day. A child, particularly an heir, would please Mr. Royse.
Marjorie's stomach fluttered again.
A child at Shaleslip Manor would please not only Mr. Royse, but the whole of Shalebury. The village owes much of its prosperity to Shaleslip Manor. Yes, a Royse heir would give everyone much to celebrate.
Marjorie spent her visit pleasantly conversing with Mrs. Baxter while rocking the sleeping babe in her arms. She could have stayed thus for hours, but knew she must leave when she caught her friend yawning.
I am afraid I have overstayed my welcome. You need rest.
Marjorie gazed a last time at Marge Ann's tiny face, and then reluctantly returned her to her mother.
I promise to visit again when you have recovered.
Thank you, Mrs. Royse. I look forward to it. Oh, before you go, I must ask you a favor.
Of course. Anything you need.
May I loan Louise to my neighbor, Mr. Goss? He is so poorly now he cannot leave his bed, and young Daisy is beside herself.
Marjorie felt as if she had swallowed a bucket of eels. Mr. Goss was another of Shaleslip Manor's tenants, a carpenter by trade. He could not work of late because of his poor health, and he had no wife to help look after himself and his daughter. Marjorie had known all of this and meant to call on Mr. Goss, but in her excitement over Mrs. Baxter's baby, it had completely slipped her mind.
Daisy is blind, is she not?
She is, and only 10 years old. Mr. Goss has been sick for years, even before his wife took ill and died, but no one knows exactly what ails him. As soon as Dr. Davies gets one set of symptoms under control, another crops up. They have no family who could come and help. Daisy has been keeping house as best she can, but, well, she has her limits, as you might imagine.
Guilt seemed to crawl up Marjorie's throat in a solid mass. She swallowed with difficulty.
You mustn't part with Louise just yet. Do not worry about Mr. Goss and Daisy. I will call on my way home and see what I can do for them.
Thank you, Mrs. Royse. It is very good of you.
Marjorie cringed inwardly at the undeserved praise and clasped hands with Mrs. Baxter. She walked the short distance to the Goss residence, berating herself for her thoughtlessness with every step. She had thought herself quite the magnanimous lady of the manor when she took to visiting the tenants, dispensing largesse with a generous hand. Her pride had turned her once charitable endeavour into a selfish pursuit, and she was heartily ashamed of herself. Her heart sank further when she reached the Gosses' humble cottage. Though it had looked well kept and cheery when she had first seen it in the early days of winter, it now had a gloomy, unkempt air about it. The grass was uncut, the hedge in need of trimming, and the flower beds overrun with weeds. There was peeling paint and dirty windows, and one shutter on the upper story hung at an angle. Marjorie was near tears as she grasped the knocker and gave the door 3 timid taps. She nearly came undone when she heard Daisy's cautious shuffling steps in the hall.
"Hello, who is there?"
The blind girl said as she opened the door.
It is Mrs. Royse, Daisy. I have come to see how you and your father are doing. May I come in?
"Of course,"
Daisy said, opening the door wider for Marjorie to enter. Marjorie stepped inside and Daisy closed the door behind her. She cast her eyes around the cottage's sparse furnishings, noting the almost empty cupboards and the moulding heel of bread lying on the table. She cursed herself for not having the foresight to go to Shaleslip Manor for a food basket before coming.
"Papa is very ill and cannot come down to see you, but I am sure he will be better in a few days. He often has weak spells."
How long has your father been ill this time?
5 days.
Has Dr. Davies been to see him?
No, Papa says he is tired of Dr. Davies poking and prodding him without results.
I understand how frustrated your father must be, but if he is so ill that he is confined to his bed, I really must insist you let me call for the doctor.
Daisy's carefree facade, unconvincing to start with, crumbled.
"I wish you would, Mrs. Royse. Papa forbade me to do it, and I am ever so worried about him. He sounds as though he is having trouble breathing."
If that be the case, I should not delay. I will go to Shaleslip Manor and send for the doctor, and then I will return and stay with you until he arrives.
"Thank you, Mrs. Royse. You are very kind to my papa and me."
Marjorie felt another twinge of guilt, but she wasted no time in returning to her phaeton and setting the ponies towards home at a smart clip. Soon, she was pulling them up in front of the stables and calling out to the nearest groom.
Charlie, take a horse and ride into Shalebury. Tell Dr. Davies to meet me at the Goss residence. Make haste, for Mr. Goss is quite unwell.
As soon as Charlie turned to do her bidding, Marjorie drove the phaeton around to the front of the house.
"Will you require the phaeton further, Mrs. Royse?"
asked the footman, who handed her down.
Yes, take it around to the servants' entrance by the kitchens.
Marjorie strode through the door, waving off the maid who sought to divest her of her spencer, gloves and bonnet, and sought the butler.
Mr. Jones, where is Mr. Royse?
There's been some trouble in the fields and he was called out. It will be a few hours before he returns.
Marjorie thanked him for the information and hastened to the kitchen, collecting the housekeeper, Mrs. Jones, along the way. Downstairs, they found Mr. Belfast and the kitchen staff busy at work.
I have just come from the Goss cottage. Mr. Goss is very ill, and Daisy is left to tend everything alone. Mr. Belfast, I know you are terribly busy preparing for the May Day celebration, but can you spare one of the kitchen hands? I would like someone to stay at the Gosses and help with the cooking and cleaning. A child of 10 should not take on so much responsibility.
Send Marie, the girl is trustworthy and makes a fine bread and soup.
Mr. Belfast said, nodding to a young woman who immediately left off kneading a lump of dough and curtsied to Marjorie.
Marie, please go to your room and gather what you need. I am unsure how long your services will be required at the Gosses, but it could be a week or more.
Marie asked another girl to take over kneading the bread and scurried to her room to pack.
Mrs. Jones, could you spare Sally to nurse Mr. Goss?
Mrs. Jones agreed and went in search of Sally, while Marjorie returned to Mr. Belfast.
Mr. Goss's cupboards are bare. Marie will need some goods to work with.
Marjorie followed Mr. Belfast to the enormous pantry and supervised as he selected sacks of flour, sugar, beans, and a bounty of other foodstuffs to send to the cottage. Baskets and buckets were brought in to carry the goods to the phaeton. When Marjorie, Marie, and Sally arrived at the Goss residence, Daisy met them at the door.
"What is that I smell?"
Daisy asked as she sniffed at one basket Marie had set on the table.
"Fruit from Shaleslip Manor's hothouse,"
Sally said as she set a bucket on the floor beneath the table.
"You'll not find finer strawberries in all of Derbyshire."
"I love strawberries."
Daisy felt inside the basket and gently picked up a strawberry and smelled it.
"They are my favourite."
She put the fruit back in the basket and continued feeling the contents.
"Peaches too. These will taste wonderful with cream and sugar. Oh, well, that is, if we had cream and sugar."
Daisy mumbled the last, hoping no one heard her. Marjorie went to her and gently laid a hand on her shoulder.
We have brought cream and sugar as well. We thought we had better, to make up for all the vegetables you'll have to eat before dessert.
Daisy's face lit up in a radiant smile, and she hugged Marjorie.
"Thank you, Mrs. Royse. You are a blessing from God."
Marjorie's own smile faltered. She was no divine messenger, but she would strive to do better, to be better. She owed it to all of her husband's tenants, and especially to Daisy. Chapter 2. Marjorie stood at the window, gazing at the sun-washed garden. Marie was busy over the stove preparing a hearty meal of stew, bread, and peach cobbler for the Gosses. Dr. Davies had arrived an hour earlier and was still upstairs examining Mr. Goss. All Marjorie could do was wait.
"Mrs. Royse?"
Marjorie turned at the sound of Sally's voice.
"Dr. Davies wants you upstairs."
"Thank you. I will go directly."
On entering the small bedchamber, Marjorie found Dr. Davies taking pains to tuck in Mr. Goss with as much care as possible. She was shocked to see how badly the man's health had declined since she last saw him. He had never been a hearty man, but now he appeared to have collapsed in upon himself. His pale skin had turned ashen and seemed to sag from his bones, which stood out more prominently than she remembered. His sunken eyes were closed, and each laboured breath rattled in his chest. Dr. Davies packed up his medical bag and met Marjorie at the door.
"I fear I have terrible news."
He whispered.
"Mr. Goss has taken a sudden and rather drastic turn for the worse. There is nothing more I can do for him other than ease his passing. I am afraid it will not be long now."
"Oh dear, how dreadful. Have you told Daisy?"
Marjorie asked.
"Daisy is refusing to speak to me. I think she knows the truth already, and to hear it spoken will make it real. She does not want to face it, but she must."
"I will speak with her,"
Marjorie assured him.
"Shall I walk you out?"
"I know my way. I will return this evening to check on Mr. Goss again. I'll give Sally the laudanum in case he awakes before then."
"Thank you, Doctor."
Marjorie closed the door behind Dr. Davies and went to Daisy, who sat on the bed next to her motionless father.
"Daisy, dearest, it is Mrs. Royse,"
Marjorie murmured, but the child did not respond. She took a seat in the chair near the bed and tucked a dark curl behind the girl's ear and out of her face.
"I know you can hear me. Please speak to me."
Daisy's fingers twitched in her lap. Marjorie reached out and took hold of her hand and gently pressed her fingers.
"Papa is sleeping now,"
Daisy whispered.
"We mustn't disturb him."
"Do not you worry, darling. The doctor gave him medicine to help him rest."
"Papa is always in so much pain, but he generally bears it so well. Not lately, though. It is getting worse."
Large tears streamed down Daisy's pale cheeks. Dr. Davies had been right. Daisy had read the signs and guessed the truth, even if she would not admit it. Marjorie's own eyes teared as she said,
"Darling, do not fret. All will be well."
The girl wiped her tears away with her hands and then turned her sightless eyes up to the ceiling.
I won't cry. Only little babies cry. I am not a baby.
It is all right to cry when your heart is broken. I think you know your papa will not be with us for much longer.
Daisy blanched but said nothing, so Marjorie pressed on.
I want you to understand you are safe and that there are people here who love you. You need not worry about anything.
Mrs. Royse, can you help me?
Of course, with anything you need.
I need you to help me find my grandpapa. He is our only family left. Everyone else is gone. Papa wrote to him a few weeks ago, but we were not sure where to send the letter, so he may not have gotten it. Will you help me find him?
Do you know where your grandfather lives?
Papa says he lives at Brazelton Manor, near Brassington.
That sounds simple enough. When I return to Shaleslip Manor, I will speak to Mr. Royse, and we will see about finding him.
Daisy laid her head on the pillow beside her father and draped an arm over him.
Mrs. Royse, I am so tired. Is it night out?
Marjorie looked at the sunshine that shone through the window onto her leg, warming her through the fabric of her gown. Her gaze returned to Daisy, so pale and wan, and wondered how many sleepless nights the girl had spent nursing her dying father.
Yes, darling,
she lied.
You rest now. Marie and Sally will stay here and care for you and your papa. Do not worry about anything. We will speak again soon.
When Gregory returned from the fields, Marjorie went outside to meet him. He was wet through, and so covered in mud that his clothes seemed to be all one colour.
My dear, what in heaven's name were you doing to arrive in such a state?
The dam by the watermill broke and flooded the field. We had to wade hip-deep in the mud to fix it or risk losing one seed crop to overwatering and another 3 to drought.
Were you successful?
For now. It is a temporary fix, but it should hold until I can get it repaired properly. Looks like I know where we will next be updating the irrigation systems.
I'm glad to hear it. Did you leave any mud in the fields, or did you decide to bring it all home with you?
Gregory's handsome features broke into a smile, and he responded,
I thought you looked so fetching with your petticoat 6 inches deep in mud last fall when you attempted the walk around Elm Grove to avoid me that I decided to see how it would improve my appearance. Tell me, have my eyes been brightened by the exercise?
Marjorie laughed, recalling her muddy walk in the early days of their acquaintance.
You have fine eyes, my love, made all the finer by dint of being the only part of you not covered in muck. If you remove your boots here, you can make it upstairs without soiling the carpets. Here, let me help you remove your coat too.
Marjorie helped him remove the soiled garment, pulling it gingerly by a relatively clean spot on the collar. She folded the muddiest part inside before handing it to Mr. Jones, who had come out to aid them.
So, my dear, did you get to hold Mrs. Baxter's new baby?
Gregory asked as they made their way into the house.
I did, and I will tell you all about it, but there is something more important we must first discuss.
After months of anticipating the babe's arrival and Marjorie's excitement just that morning, Gregory could imagine nothing would take precedence over recounting the tale of her visit to the minutest detail.
Is everyone all right? Has something happened?
I'm afraid something has happened. Mr. Goss is dying. He took a turn for the worse, and Dr. Davies says there is no hope of recovery. I've sent Marie and Sally to keep house and nurse Mr. Goss, but that is a temporary fix, as you put it, with the watermill. We must plan for his daughter's care after his passing.
Gregory pinched the bridge of his nose and shook his head sadly. When he looked up at Marjorie, his eyes were clouded with remorse.
Mr. Goss has been fighting one ailment after another for as long as I have known him. Dr. Davies has consulted with every other physician in the area, and twice I have brought specialists from London to see him. The response is always the same. No one knows what is wrong with him. Poor man. I wish I could have done more.
There may be something more we can do. That is what I wanted to speak to you about. Mr. Goss needs help in contacting his father. Daisy said they sent a letter to him at Braselton Manor in Brassington, but they have not received a response.
Braselton Manor? Surely not.
Gregory stopped mid-stride and looked at Marjorie.
It is nothing but old ruins, abandoned and uninhabitable.
I must have misunderstood.
Perhaps I had better speak to Mr. Goss myself. Is he well enough to receive visitors?
No, but I am afraid we haven't much choice if we are to act quickly.
Very well, let me wash up and find a change of clothes, and then we will go there directly.
Marjorie remarked to Gregory how the undergardener she had sent to the Goss cottage earlier that day had been hard at work. The grass was clipped, the hedges trimmed, and the flower beds divested of weeds. The shutter still hung crookedly on broken hinges, but they would fix it tomorrow. Gregory thought how it must have galled Mr. Goss, a skilled carpenter, to not be able to repair his own shutters. Marie came out to meet them as the phaeton stopped in front of the house.
Daisy's sleeping,
she said in response to Marjorie's inquiry.
I woke her for supper. I didn't like to, only I knew she hadn't eaten all day, and maybe not the day before. She ate a little and fell asleep at the table. There was no waking her after that. I had to carry her to her bed.
And how is Mr. Goss?
Gregory asked as they followed Marie inside.
He's fading away, sir, before our very eyes. Sally's with him now. She's just given him more laudanum.
Mr. Royse went upstairs to the invalid's room while Marjorie remained in the kitchen with Marie, compiling a list of further supplies needed for the kitchen and the household in general. When Gregory entered, Sally straightened and curtsied, and then returned to her task of applying a poultice to Mr. Goss's chest to help him breathe easier. Gregory approached the bed and looked down upon the stricken man who had been his family's tenant for the past 12 years.
Paul, it is Mr. Royse. Can you hear me?
Mr. Goss dragged his eyes open with some difficulty and regarded Gregory through a haze of pain.
Can you speak?
A little,
Mr. Goss mumbled. Unless one bent down to listen closely, his words were unintelligible.
Daisy told Mrs. Royse that you think your father lives at Braselton Manor. Is that right?
Mr. Goss nodded once.
Are you certain? Braselton Manor is a burnt-out ruin.
He is there.
Mr. Goss rasped.
The Duchess of Marwick was my aunt.
Gregory's expression hardened as he thought. Then he said,
Why have you never told me of the connection?
My father was a bastard.
His words were so quiet and breathy that Mr. Royse had to lean close to hear them. He caught a whiff of Sally's poultice, and his eyes watered.
You think he lives at the manor ruins, then?
Haunts them, more like.
Gregory raised an eyebrow at his choice of words.
Very well. Tomorrow I will go to Braselton and see if I can find him.
Thank you,
Mr. Goss whispered. He closed his eyes as the laudanum took effect.
I will return when I have some news. Hold fast, Mr. Goss. Your daughter needs you.
Mr. Goss dragged his lids open once more. He could no longer respond, but his eyes bespoke sorrow. Gregory felt helpless, wishing he could ease the trials this good man endured. He also wished to ease the anxiety he felt for Daisy. Soon she would become an orphan, a condition Gregory was all too familiar with and would wish on no one.
Mrs. Royse, are you ready to leave?
Gregory asked upon descending the stairs.
Would you not like to wait for Dr. Davies? I suspect he will be here soon.
I have the information I came for. I must send a letter to the magistrate. If Mr. Goss wishes to see his father before he dies, we have not a moment to lose.
Marjorie followed Gregory out the door and to the waiting phaeton. He handed her in and then got in the driver's seat, flicking the reins until the placid ponies were going much faster than Marjorie had ever driven them.
Gregory, my dear, slow down,
Marjorie said as she clung to the side of the phaeton.
I do not think it is safe to drive this fast.
Gregory slowed the ponies and glanced at her. He looked tired. It was not mere physical fatigue, but more to do with his state of mind. His heart was heavy, dragged down by the weight of past and future loss.
It is a pity one does not get to choose their kinfolk,
he blurted.
There is nary a man in England less suitable to care for the child than her grandfather. Anyone else would be preferable to him.
Do you know her grandfather?
Marjorie asked.
No, but I have heard the stories about him.
Tell me.
Have you ever heard tell of the murder of the Duchess of Marwick?
Murder?
Marjorie exclaimed, and she listened with rapt attention as Gregory recounted a tale fit for a Gothic novel.
Some 30 years ago or more, Braselton Manor was part of the old Marwick Duchy. The Duke of Marwick preferred life in London, but his wife preferred the quiet and solitude of the country, so she set up residence at Braselton Manor while his Grace did as he pleased in London. One summer, the Duke was passing through Brassington on his way to holiday at the lakes. He broke his journey at Braselton Manor to see his wife. He brought his mistress with him, which upset the Duchess.
Understandably,
Marjorie said, raising a single eyebrow.
Quite so,
Gregory answered as he guided the ponies up Shaleslip Manor's drive.
The Duchess of Marwick always knew her husband had a mistress, but she turned a blind eye as long as he was discreet. His arrival at Braselton Manor with his mistress in tow so enraged the Duchess that she threw a lighted lamp at her husband's head. She missed, and the lamp shattered against the wall, catching the tapestries on fire. The manor burnt to the ground, and several servants died in the blaze. It is said the ashes smouldered for an entire week.
How dreadful,
Marjorie murmured.
There is more,
Gregory said as he pulled up the team in front of Shaleslip Manor and helped Marjorie down from the phaeton.
We have not got to the murder of the Duchess yet.
He offered Marjorie his arm, and they went to the library, where she reclined on her favourite settee. Gregory settled into the chair next to her and continued his tale.
3 weeks after the fire, the Duke returned to Brassington. He had quarrelled with his mistress, and now felt remorse for his ill treatment of his wife. He sought to apologise and offer to rebuild the estate. But when he arrived at her rooms in the inn, he found her embracing another man. There was a heated exchange, and the Duchess of Marwick was shot.
Good Lord, this story gets worse and worse.
The Duke of Marwick accused the other man of the murder. On the day of the trial, 3 servants who worked for the Duchess came forward and confessed they saw the altercation and subsequent murder. They declared it was the Duke who shot his wife. They also said the man was not her lover, but her younger half-brother, who was a recently married Navy man from Portsmouth. Believing herself abandoned by her husband, Lady Marwick had written to him for help, and he had come to her aid. There was no record of the Duchess having a half-brother, and so they discounted the servant's story. But there was enough doubt that the court refused to issue the death penalty. However, the Duke could not allow the man to go free, fearing he would seek revenge. Money changed hands, and the man was arrested again on trumped-up charges and imprisoned in Newgate. He spent 13 years in that miserable hellhole before the truth came out.
Why did it take so long?
The Duke of Marwick paid out a great deal of money to ensure the truth remained buried. The one person who refused to be bribed into silence was the accused's wife. With her husband imprisoned, she set out to find the truth. It took years, but eventually she discovered proof of the family connection between her husband and the Duchess. She sought and was granted an audience at Newgate. After listening to her evidence, the warden still refused to release her husband, but people talked. Word of the additional evidence made it to London, where it reached the Duke of Marwick. He went to his club and got very, very drunk. He, in his intoxicated state, boasted of killing his wife and raged that all the money he had spent to cover it up was wasted.
Who overheard him?
Nearly everyone in the club, among them a general with enough honour and clout to get the right man charged and the other exonerated.
So they let the man go?
Yes. 2 days later they brought him out of his cell, opened the front gates and pushed him out without so much as a pair of boots. He tried to return to Portsmouth to be with his wife, but prison had changed him. He was no longer the man she had married. He also had a son he had never met and who wanted nothing to do with him. He was no longer fit for the Navy, and no one else would give him work. Unable to return to his old life, he left Portsmouth to live a life of solitude.
What a story this is,
Marjorie exclaimed.
But how does it relate to our present predicament? What does the story have to do with Daisy's grandfather?
The elder Mr. Goss is the late Duchess of Marwick's half-brother, her father's bastard, as Mr. Goss informed me this evening, which explains why it was so difficult to prove his kinship.
His father refused to claim his bastard,
Marjorie surmised.
So poor Goss was the son he had not met until they released him?
Yes, and if Daisy is correct and her grandfather lives at the manor, he is probably the source of the ghost stories.
What do you mean?
After arresting and sentencing the Duke of Marwick to hang for his wife's murder, the king stripped him of his lands, titles, and wealth. His Majesty had no trouble disposing of most of the properties on deserving individuals, but Brazelton Manor proved difficult to allocate. It was bestowed upon a succession of worthy gentlemen, but they each refused after inspecting the ruins, claiming the place was haunted. Eventually, the king gave up trying to give it to anyone else. Locals believe the ghosts of Lady Marwick and the servants who died in the fire haunt the estate, driving away anyone who claims the property to rebuild. That is why it remains in ruins to this day.
Ghosts? Well, I know people believe in such things, but I am sceptical myself. I would more readily believe that a mortal hand is behind the mischief.
If Mr. Goss Sr. lives at the ruins, it is unbeknownst to the locals. I will write to the magistrate and request him to accompany me tomorrow. We will find Mr. Goss and speak to him. If all goes well, we will bring him back to his family.
I hope you are right, my dear.
Gregory sent his letter to Mr. Hayes, the magistrate, and he and Marjorie passed the evening in a sombre mood, waiting for a reply. It came just before they retired to bed. Mr. Hayes would present himself at Shaleslip Manor the next morning and accompany Gregory to Brazelton Manor.
Can you believe all that happened today?
Marjorie said, as they curled up in bed together.
It seems a lifetime ago that I visited Mrs. Baxter and held her baby. Before I forget, I must tell you how the Baxters have honoured our family.
I am listening,
Gregory said, wrapping his arm around Marjorie and stroking her shoulder. Marjorie told him the babe's name and then overpraised the child.
I cannot wait until we have a child of our own,
she said as she laid her head on his chest and nestled deeper into his arms.
You will be an excellent mother.
And you will be an outstanding father.
I hope so. I still want 6 miniature Marjories running around the house, regardless of the expense of providing dowries.
Gregory cupped her face with his hand and gazed lovingly into her eyes.
Do not forget, you must also beat away unsuitable beaux.
So be it. I have had plenty of practice already.
What about a son? Would you not prefer a miniature of your own to inherit Shaleslip Manor?
A son would be wonderful, but unnecessary. Shaleslip Manor is not entailed. A daughter may inherit if we have no son.
Though the lack of entail eases my mind, I want at least one son, and I desire it to be soon.
Marjorie lifted her head to look up at him. Ever so gently, Gregory brushed his lips against hers. Marjorie pressed her body against him, her fingers entwined in his hair, pulling him close as she kissed him back. Gregory's hands traced Marjorie's curves, sending shivers of pleasure up and down her spine. Her breathing became ragged, warming his neck and heating him to his core.
Love me,
Marjorie urged.
Love me as you have never loved me before.
Gregory stilled, his breath caught in his throat, and then he obeyed. For an hour, Gregory worshipped his wife and loved her every way he knew how, and a few new ways he discovered with her help. When both were exhausted and once again settled into each other's arms, he fell right to sleep. Marjorie did not. The tale Gregory had told her earlier returned to the forefront of her mind. She knew there was no such thing as ghosts and agreed with Gregory that it must be Mr. Goss scaring people away. Nonetheless, she could not help dwelling on thoughts of deadly fires, murdered wives, and vengeful spirits. Her vivid imagination kept her awake far into the night. Chapter 3. The first rays of dawn were just crowning the horizon when the magistrate arrived. Marjorie stood in her dressing gown and watched Gregory and Mr. Hayes leave on horseback with Gregory's two most trusted footmen. After the men rode out of sight, Marjorie returned to her rooms to dress, eat, and write letters to her sisters, Joanna Wallace and Gemma. It was 10 minutes to 8 when her tasks were complete, and her phaeton was hitched up and brought around for her use. She drove to the Goss cottage and lightly knocked on the door. Marie answered, her arms covered in flour up to the elbows.
Marie, the bread smells wonderful,
Marjorie said.
And what is it you are making now?
Sweet rolls. Daisy says she's not had sweet rolls since her mama died. I thought I would make some for her as a treat.
That is very kind of you. Where is Daisy now?
She is upstairs with Sally, trying to get Mr. Goss to take some thin porridge.
He is awake?
He is, but 'twould be a mercy if he weren't.
Just then, Daisy came down the stairs with a bowl in her hands.
Marie, is someone here with you? I heard voices.
Daisy, dearest, it is Mrs. Royse. I'm here to see how your father is faring.
He is a little better. He even ate some porridge this morning. I think he likes Marie's cooking.
Daisy placed the nearly full bowl in the washtub and then went to Marjorie and wrapped her arms around her waist.
Thank you for sending Marie and Sally. It is very nice to have someone else here to talk to.
You are welcome.
Do you like to read, Mrs. Royse?
Daisy asked as she led Marjorie to a bench near the fire.
I do. Reading is one of my favourite pastimes.
Papa always reads to me. Do you think he would like it if I read to him?
You know how to read?
Marjorie questioned sceptically.
I cannot see the words, of course, but I can memorize stories. Papa reads to me every day from a book of French fairy tales. La Belle et la Bête is my favourite. Do you know French, Mrs. Royse?
I know a little. Beauty and the Beast is a favourite of mine as well.
Daisy went to the shelf near the window and picked up a small book. Returning to her seat, she opened it to where a ribbon marked her spot and quoted,
There was once a very rich merchant who had 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. Being a man of sense, he spared no cost for their education, but gave them all kinds of masters. His daughters were extremely handsome, especially the youngest. When she was little, everybody admired her and called her the Little Beauty, so that, as she grew up, she still went by the name of Beauty, which made her sisters very jealous.
Your recitation was perfect. Do you know the entire tale?
Marjorie asked.
Not every word, but I know a good portion of it. Papa has been helping me memorize it.
Daisy flipped through a few pages before holding out the tome to Marjorie and asking,
Will you read to me?
Of course.
If you will, please begin at the part that says, "There is nothing I desire so much as to see my poor father and know what he is doing."
Marjorie turned the pages, glancing at the text until she found the requested passage.
Here it is. Are you ready?
Daisy nodded and then leaned her head against Marjorie's shoulder while she read.
"Alas," said she with a sigh, "there is nothing I desire so much as to see my poor father and know what he is doing." She had no sooner said this, when casting her eyes on a great looking glass, to her great amazement, she saw her own home, where her father arrived with a very dejected countenance. Her sisters went to meet him, and notwithstanding their endeavours to appear sorrowful, their joy, felt for having got rid of their sister, was visible in every feature. A moment after, everything disappeared, and Beauty's apprehensions at this proof of Beast's complaisance. At noon she found dinner ready, and while at table was entertained with an excellent concert of music, though without seeing anybody.
The aroma of baking sweet rolls filled the cosy cottage as Marjorie read. The smell, combined with the beloved fairy tale, transported her back to her own happy childhood, and it was with some regret that she read the last paragraph.
Immediately the fairy gave a stroke with her wand, and in a moment all that were in the hall were transported into the prince's dominions. His subjects received him with joy. He married Beauty and lived with her many years, and their happiness, as it was founded on virtue, was complete.
Daisy had listened to the story silently, but when Marjorie finished, she stirred and quoted,
"Do not trust too much in your eyes. Do not let yourself be deceived by appearances."
Daisy's voice filled with emotion as she said,
"Papa says I am lucky to be born blind, for appearances cannot deceive me."
"Your papa is a wise man,"
Marjorie said. She closed the book and placed it in Daisy's hands.
"When Mama died from the influenza, I was sad, but Papa was there and made me feel better. When Papa dies, I do not know what I will do."
Daisy's voice faltered, and she struggled to hold back her tears. Marjorie was not at first equal to replying. Her heart wrenched for this innocent girl who had been through more hardships in her short life than Marjorie could imagine. She took Daisy's hand in hers and said,
"We cannot always know the Lord's plan for each of us. He must have thought your mother fulfilled her purpose in this life, so he called her back to heaven. Now he has need of your father."
"Where is heaven?"
Daisy questioned. Marjorie longed to answer, but she was not sure how. After gathering her thoughts, she said simply,
"Heaven may be a far-off land, or it might surround us. No mortal knows for sure."
"Do you think I will ever see my mother again, Mrs. Royse?"
"Not while you yet live, my dear,"
Marjorie said as kindly as she could. Daisy sighed, and a tear slipped down her cheek.
"But, Mrs. Royse, what am I to do now? Do you think Mr. Royse will find Grandpapa?"
"He will try, but I do not want you to get your hopes up. It has been a very long time since anyone has seen your grandfather. We do not know if he can care for you as a young girl ought to be cared for."
Marjorie struggled to keep her tears at bay. Her heart ached for this dear child who would soon be an orphan, and tried to face it so bravely. Marjorie's thoughts momentarily turned to her sister-in-law. Gemma had been even younger than Daisy when she was orphaned, but she'd had a much older brother who loved her and cared for her. But what about Daisy? Who does she have? Marjorie wondered.
"Grandpapa will come. Just you wait and see,"
Daisy said as she sat up straight and wiped at her face.
"Papa promised he would love me just as soon as he saw me."
"I am sure he will, for I cannot imagine anyone not loving you in an instant. I love you, Daisy."
"I love you too, Mrs. Royse. Thank you for reading to me. It made me feel much better. I will take the story upstairs and read it to Papa."
"You do that? Listening to your sweet voice is just what he needs right now.
Marjorie watched as Daisy skipped towards the stairs, stopping a few feet before the first step and feeling for the wall. When her hand touched it, she bounded up the stairs with the energy of a child filled with hope. Though Marjorie knew it was folly, she prayed Mr. Goss would recover, and his daughter's hope would not be dashed away to be replaced by misery. Chapter 4. The village of Brassington, the site of the infamous murder of the Duchess of Marwick, faded into the distance as Gregory and his companions followed the disused moorland road that led to Braselton Manor. Mile after mile of gritstone and shale, rutted and overgrown with weeds, passed beneath the horses' hooves. When the party of riders crested a hill and first caught sight of the manor ruins, Gregory thought it most obliging of her Grace's ghost to leave the villagers in peace and travel all this way to do her haunting. Had it been him, he would have stayed at the comfortable, well-appointed Brassington Inn. Braselton Manor had been a grand house before the fire, famous for its spectacular gardens. The grounds were immense, dotted with ruined outbuildings of all shapes and sizes. Crumbling statues, covered in lichen and clinging plants, stood as silent sentinels in overgrown gardens long since reclaimed by wilderness. Like a small army of green men, Gregory fancied. The house itself was a forlorn sight. Only the foundation was left, with scorched and blackened support columns reaching up like the skeletal fingers of a giant. Gregory imagined the wind shrieking and moaning through those columns and suppressed a shiver. He cast his eyes over the wild landscape, searching for Mr. Goss. There was no sign of him anywhere. As he wandered around the ruins and the devastated garden paths, Gregory considered how much Marjorie would love this place. Mother Nature's inexorable reclamation of the structures of man held a spellbinding beauty. The manor ruins were eerie, but in a romantic way, which he knew Marjorie would love, especially if she could wander the place uninhibited.
Mr. Royse, over here.
Mr. Hayes called from behind the ruined manor house.
Look there,
he said when Gregory approached and pointed to slight indentations on the earth. Gregory called over his footmen, Jared Thatcher and Daniel Scott, both of whom were competent trackers.
Very good, sir,
Jared said.
These footprints are only a day old, 2 at the most. Come, let us follow them.
Daniel and Jared followed the tracks away from the manor, the other 2 men trailing behind. Before long, they found more tracks, a broken twig here, a bent stalk there. It became apparent that someone frequently traversed the manor grounds and took some pains to hide their presence from casual observers.
Mr. Royse, sir, how long do we plan to keep up the search?
Jared inquired, after more than an hour of walking in circles with his nose to the ground like a bloodhound.
Until we find Mr. Goss. It appears he does not care for company.
I am not partial to large crushes myself, but this seems a little extreme. If we do not find him soon, then we will not make it back to Shaleslip Manor before dark.
Do not tell me you are afraid of a little night ride.
Daniel scoffed, bent nearly double as he tried to determine the age of a partial boot print in what had been the kitchen herb garden.
I am not afraid of anything, and you know it. I just want to know how much longer. I promised Mr. Jones I would help him inventory the wine cellar.
The inventory can wait,
Gregory exhorted.
Our errand is far more pressing.
Yes, Mr. Royse,
Jared said almost gleefully, hoping the dreaded inventory would not wait, but would carry on in his absence with another footman playing the part of Mr. Jones's hapless victim. The quartet continued searching for another half an hour until they found more definite signs of human habitation.
Over there, I see something,
Gregory said, pointing to a tattered piece of fabric fluttering on the thorns of an overgrown blackberry bush engulfing the crumbling herb garden wall. They picked their way through the brambles and found a cellar door in remarkably good repair. The footman pried it open, and all 4 men peered into the darkness.
Mr. Goss, are you here?
Gregory called out as he freed the scrap of fabric that had caught his attention. It appeared to be part of a tattered oilskin garment. Jared feated a lantern from his saddlebags, while Daniel searched the herb garden.
There's a fire pit over here,
he said when Jared returned.
The fire is out, but the ashes are still warm. The flames would not be visible from the road. Do you remember what the villagers said about the ruins still smoking at night?
Gregory raised an eyebrow at the discovery and bade Jared to hurry in, lighting the lantern. Then he and Mr. Hayes followed the footman down the earthen steps into the cellar. It was bigger than any of them expected, so big the light of the lantern was insufficient to illuminate the entire space. Within the circle of light, they could see tangles of roots hanging from the ceiling and snaking down the walls. Shelves that must have once held enough food stores to see a small army through the winter stood empty, save for a few jars of honey and a small assortment of fruit and vegetables, some fresh, some wrinkled, but certainly no more than a month or 2 old.
Someone has made this his home,
Gregory murmured.
Look what I found,
Mr. Hayes said. There was a pile of rocks topped with a rough wooden plank, creating a low, rickety table. Organized on top was a plate, bowl, and pewter mug. All 3 were chipped and cracked and dented, but still serviceable. There was also a set of tarnished silverware and a carving knife. Gregory thought he could see the outline of a sleeping pallet just beyond the circle of light. He was motioning to Jared to bring the lantern closer when they were stopped by a menacing growl behind them.
Get out of here.
The 4 men turned as one and found an unwashed, bearded man in filthy, tattered clothing holding a dead rabbit in a snare and his shotgun pointed at them.
Is your name Goss?
Mr. Hayes asked.
My name is none of your business. Get away from here and don't come back.
The man flicked his shotgun towards the cellar door.
Now hold on just a moment. We have come a long way to speak with you. If your name is Goss, we have urgent news concerning your son and granddaughter.
Son,
he roared, seeming to grow in stature as he swelled with fury.
I have no son, and I certainly have no granddaughter. Get out of here, or I will kill the lot of you.
Mr. Goss,
Gregory began.
Paul is ill, very ill. In fact, at this very moment he is lying on his deathbed. We have come to take you to him. He has asked to see you.
I am not going anywhere with the likes of you. That boy made his choice. He is already dead to me, has been since the day I met him.
What about your granddaughter? Who will take care of her? You are the only family she has left. Her mother is dead already.
The hermit threw aside the rabbit and stomped up to Gregory. He was so close, his breath hit Gregory in a hot, fetid wave when he snarled,
What makes you think I care one whit? Get out. I am done talking to you.
I am afraid he is not doing well.
Dr. Davies informed Marjorie when he stopped at Shaleslip Manor after his evening examination of Mr. Goss.
His breathing is shallow, and he is incoherent. Sally said he's been that way since midday. It is unlikely he will survive the night.
I am very sorry to hear that. I hoped he would live longer for his daughter's sake.
As did I. Do you know if Mr. Royse and the magistrate found the missing grandfather?
Dr. Davies said.
I do not know. They have not yet returned from Brassington. I expect them after supper, and then we will know more.
I hope they bring good news. I will return first thing in the morning. Send for me should I be needed during the night.
Thank you, I will.
Marjorie took the phaeton once more to the Goss cottage to check on Daisy. When she arrived, the child sat beside her father, reciting memorized passages from Beauty and the Beast. She even turned the pages at the correct intervals. If a stranger was to witness her actions, they would not know she was blind. As for Mr. Goss, if Marjorie had not been told by the doctor that he still lived, she would have thought him already dead. His skin was the colour of ash, and she could barely detect the rise and fall of his chest. When Daisy heard the muffled sound of footsteps in the room, she stopped reciting and asked,
"Who is there?"
"All is well, Daisy. It is Mrs. Royse,"
Marjorie said timidly. Never had she been in the same room with someone so near death. She admitted to herself she was a little afraid.
"I was just reading to Papa."
"I am sure your father appreciates the stories."
"Do you think he hears me then?"
"Yes, I think he does. Even if he does not comprehend the words, I am sure he recognises the comforting sound of your voice."
Marjorie was desperate to set Daisy's mind at ease, but it was very hard, as she had little confidence in the things she spoke.
"Has Mr. Royse returned with Grandpapa?"
"No, he has not. It will be very late when Mr. Royse returns. You must wait until tomorrow to see if he was successful."
"Grandpapa will come. I know he will."
"Yes, dearest, let us hope so."
Marjorie put Daisy to bed in her own room and left Marie to look after her. She then drove the short distance to Shaleslip Manor and retired to her rooms. She felt positively ill after seeing Mr. Goss lying motionless on his bed. She still felt haunted by the feeling of dread she had experienced when she thought he had already shed his mortal coil. It was evident that preparations must be made for Mr. Goss's imminent demise. Though she had no appetite, she rang for a supper tray and ate what she could. Then she settled in for a long wait. The hour was well past midnight when she heard a stirring in the house that heralded Gregory's return. The rains had begun 2 hours ago, and she worried he would be as muddy as he had been after his adventure at the dam. He was not, though he was near exhaustion and chilled to the bone.
You should have seen him, Marjorie. He was the wildest man I have ever laid eyes on. He had hair hanging down his back and a big bushy beard. His smell was vile, and his temperament odious. Mr. Goss has been living alone for far too long. We tried everything short of subduing him and tying him to the saddle, but he wants nothing to do with his son or Daisy.
Gregory stripped off his wet clothing and put on his housecoat, which his valet had thoughtfully set out to warm by the fire. He sighed when the heated fabric enveloped him, and he took a seat near the fire, accepting a cup of tea with a splash of brandy from Marjorie. He sipped the hot liquid and felt it heat him from the inside.
"What do we do now? Dr. Davies does not think Mr. Goss will last the night. I saw him after the doctor left, and he is right. Mr. Goss is not long for this world. And what of Daisy? Are we to keep her and be responsible for her?"
Marjorie looked at him with eager anticipation.
No, I do not think we are the best family for Daisy.
Marjorie's expression fell, but Gregory failed to notice and continued.
On my way home, I gave the matter some thought. There is a family in Shalebury who lost their infant daughter to brain fever. Had the girl lived, she would be about Daisy's age now. Tomorrow, I intend to visit Mr. and Mrs. Green and see if they will foster Daisy.
"If you think it best,"
Marjorie said, her shoulders slumping. She had grown fond of the child and was willing to take on guardianship if no one else would.
I do,
Gregory said. Then he caught sight of Marjorie's downcast expression and continued in a gentler tone.
Daisy would have a good life here, but how would she feel once we have our own children? She would be caught between two worlds, above a tradesman's daughter but beneath a gentleman's daughter. I think it would be in her best interest to stay within her sphere. Do you not agree?
Marjorie cringed at his choice of words. She had been accused of aspiring to quit her sphere by marrying Gregory. What kind of censure would Daisy face from both her peers and her betters as a blind girl living on her landlord's charity?
"Yes, of course, you are right. I knew we could not keep her here forever, but I am exceedingly worried about her. When her father dies, she will have no one, At least you and Gemma had each other when your parents died. Daisy will be entirely alone. It makes me melancholy.
Do not distress yourself. I am sure the Greens will welcome Daisy into their family. She will be showered with love and affection.
I am happy to hear that,
Marjorie said, though her woeful expression remained.
What else is bothering you? I can see there is something wrong.
It is nothing.
Marjorie, I cannot lift your burdens if you will not share them with me.
I will tell you, but you will think me foolish.
Marjorie relented.
While I was waiting for your return, I thought about our future children, about how distressed I would be not to live long enough to raise them. Who will take care of them if something happens to us? Will they be loved like we would love them?
Tears pooled in Marjorie's eyes, threatening to spill over.
My dear, you must not think such gloomy thoughts. Remember how many relatives we have. Your sister Joanna and Mr. Wallace would take in and love our children as their own, as would Gemma. You must remember I was not much older than my dear sister is now when I took over her guardianship. Our children will also have your parents, Aunt and Uncle Lancaster, Lord and Lady Edale, and many others. In addition, our children will have one enormous advantage. They will have Shaleslip Manor. Our future children will be provided for no matter what happens to us.
Gregory pulled Marjorie to him and encircled her with his strong, protective arms. Marjorie rested her head on his chest and took slow, deep breaths in time with his heartbeat to calm her anxiety.
Our children will never face such uncertainty as Daisy does now. If it makes you feel better, I promise I will do everything I can to ensure a family who will show her genuine love fosters Daisy.
Thank you, Gregory. Every child deserves love, no matter their situation.
Chapter 5. The knock on their bedroom door was so faint, Marjorie had trouble registering what it meant as she tried to shake the fog of sleep from her mind. She sat up in bed and listened. All she could hear was Gregory's steady breathing and the patter of rain on the window panes. Then she heard the light tapping again, this time louder. Marjorie slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the door. Opening it, she peered into the hall and saw Mrs. Jones in her dressing gown, holding a candelabrum.
I am sorry to wake you, Mrs. Royse, but Marie just brought word that Mr. Goss has died. Charlie has gone for Dr. Davies, and I've sent Jared and Daniel back with Marie. They can help with the body.
Marjorie's heart sank.
Thank you, Mrs. Jones. Please have the phaeton readied. I shall wake Mr. Royse, and then we will go directly to the cottage.
Marjorie woke her husband, and the two quickly dressed and boarded the phaeton. Gregory snapped the reins and directed the sleepy, reluctant ponies towards the Goss cottage. They were silent during the short drive, each lost in their own solemn thoughts. When they arrived, Marie opened the door and welcomed them inside, where Jared and Daniel were waiting to assist in whatever way they were needed.
Does Daisy know yet?
Marjorie asked Marie.
No, she is still sleeping.
I think I should wake and tell her before there is so much commotion she wakes.
Everyone agreed, and Marjorie climbed the stairs to Daisy's room with heavy feet.
Daisy, wake up, dearest.
She leant over Daisy's bed and stroked her forehead.
Is it morning already?
Daisy mumbled sleepily. She stretched her arms toward the small window through which the rays of the morning sun usually shone.
No, it is not morning. I am sorry to wake you, but I am afraid something has happened.
Is it Papa?
Daisy sat up.
Is my Papa all right?
Marjorie's eyes welled up, and she held Daisy's hand.
I am sorry, but your Papa.
Do not say it. No, I will not listen.
Daisy put her hands over her ears and shook her head. Tears sprang to her eyes and spilt out. Marjorie tried to pull Daisy's hands from her ears, but she would not allow it. She weaved her fingers into her hair on both sides of her head and held tight.
I want my Papa.
Daisy screamed over and over until Marjorie climbed up on the bed and wrapped the child in her arms. She drew Daisy tight against her bosom, rocking her like a baby. Her heart was heavy for the poor girl who had now lost everyone dear to her. Daisy crumbled in Marjorie's arms and wept.
First my mamma and now my papa. Why did they have to die?
Hush there now.
Marjorie soothed.
I do not know why this happened, but it has. Dearest, you will be all right. I will make sure of it.
Daisy continued to cry, and her little body racked with sobs so great one would think her bones would break. She cried for at least 10 minutes before her sobs subsided. Then she pushed herself out of Marjorie's arms and wiped at her nose.
Daisy, would you like to see your father one last time before Dr. Davies comes for him?
Yes, take me to Papa.
Marjorie took her hand and led her across the hall to her father's room. Daisy went to his bed and climbed up next to him. She felt his cooling cheeks with trembling fingers, and another sob escaped her. Tears dripped from her eyes onto the blankets as she hugged him and wailed. Marjorie shooed Sally out of the room and sat in the corner, allowing Daisy some precious last moments with her father. Daisy sobbed against him until she had nearly cried herself back to sleep. The poor child was exhausted.
Daisy, we should get you back to bed. Will you let the footman carry you to your room?
Marjorie asked.
I want to stay with Papa.
That is not possible. It is unhealthy for you to stay now that your father has passed. I am sorry, dearest, but I must insist you move to another room.
Will you stay with me?
Marjorie hesitated, thinking of all that needed to be done until Daisy began crying again.
Please, Mrs. Royse, I have no one else. Please say you will stay with me.
Hush now, of course I will. Come, let Mr. Scott carry you to your room.
Marjorie called Daniel, who came to the room and picked up Daisy.
You are very tall,
Daisy said as she wrapped her arms around Daniel's neck.
Why, thank you for noticing. I am the tallest footman at Shaleslip Manor, you know.
He had been trying for levity, but Daisy was immune.
Papa used to carry me on his back. I will miss him.
Of course you will. May I tell you a secret? I was only a year or two older than you when my papa died.
What about your mamma?
I do not remember her. She died when I was very young.
You are just like me then, an orphan.
I am. From the time I was 12, I have been on my own. I survived, and so will you. I can tell you are strong, just like me.
Do you ever miss your mamma and papa?
All the time. But after a while, it did not hurt so much anymore. I suspect it will be the same for you.
Marjorie kept her lips sealed as she opened the door to Daisy's room and stepped aside for Daniel. She had met Daniel's parents only the month before. Mr. and Mrs. Scott owned a small yet prosperous dairy farm near Edale Hall. They had stopped at Shaleslip Manor on their way to visit friends in Shalebury and presented Marjorie with a magnificent wheel of cheese. A heartier, healthier couple she had never met. She gave Daniel a warning look, even though she understood why he had lied. She only hoped Daisy would never discover his perfidy. Daniel smiled an apology, though he had no regrets. If the sweet child in his arms ever found out about his parents, he would simply claim to be adopted, and woe to any who contradicted him. Perhaps it would even help the girl reconcile to living with a foster family. He laid her on the bed and stepped back as she wiped at her eyes and sniffed back her tears.
My papa always said I was strong and independent, but now I am not so sure. Mr. Scott, I am scared to be on my own. Where am I going to go? Where am I going to live? I need Grandpapa more than ever now.
Do not you worry. I am sure Mr. and Mrs. Royse will take care of everything, just like they take care of me.
Daniel bowed to Marjorie, who rolled her eyes but remained silent as he continued.
Right now, you just need to worry about resting. It has been a trying night, and you need your sleep.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Good night.
Marjorie pulled the blankets up around Daisy and tucked her in tight.
There, how is that?
It is fine.
Daisy said as she clenched the blanket in her hands, as if afraid it too would be taken from her.
Please stay here with me. I am scared to be alone.
Do not worry. I am not going anywhere.
Marjorie moved the rocking chair closer to Daisy's bed and sat, covering herself with a lap blanket.
You go to sleep now. When you wake up, I will be here.
Mr. Royse, what a pleasure to see you, sir. Is there something I can help you with?
Mr. Green asked when Gregory entered the grocer's shop early the following morning.
If you have a few minutes, I wish to speak to you and your wife.
Of course. Edmund, you are in charge until I return.
Mr. Green called to his son, who was stocking shelves in the corner.
Yes, Papa.
Edmund answered with a respectful bow to Mr. Royse.
If you will follow me, Mrs. Green is upstairs.
Mr. Royse followed Mr. Green behind the counter and stepped through a curtain, then climbed the back stairs to the rooms above the shop where the family lived.
Mr. Royse.
Mrs. Green gasped when her husband led Gregory into their little parlour. She offered a quick curtsy as she wiped her hands on her apron.
Good morning, Mrs. Green. I apologise for arriving without warning, but I am afraid my business is urgent and cannot be delayed.
Come in and have a seat.
Mrs. Green offered Gregory the most comfortable chair, while she and her husband sat on the wooden bench with plaid cushions across from him.
You may not have heard, but Mr. Goss passed away during the night.
No, we had not heard.
Mr. Green said.
How dreadful! Oh, what of Daisy?
Mrs. Green inquired. She had long harboured a fondness for the girl, as Gregory had suspected.
She is why I have come to speak with you.
Mrs. Green reached out and took hold of her husband's hand. Her fingers were trembling.
Go on, Mr. Royse. We are listening.
Daisy has only one family member we know of, a grandfather. Unfortunately, Mr. Goss has been estranged from his family for some time and wants nothing to do with his granddaughter.
Mr. Royse told the Greens about Mr. Goss's past and his own recent encounter with him.
Mr. Royse, you weren't thinking of leaving Daisy with that man, were you?
Truth be told, I was. He is family, and she has no one else.
No one else? Why, I would...
Mrs. Green clamped her mouth shut, afraid of saying something she should not in front of a man as important as Mr. Royse.
Your daughter would be about Daisy's age had she lived. I know she could never replace your dear girl, but I wonder if you would consider fostering Daisy. Mrs. Royse and I will take her in for a few days while you think it over.
We'll take her?
Mrs. Green blurted out without so much as glancing at her husband.
We will take her, and we will love her as if she were our own daughter. Where is Daisy now? She's not alone, is she?
She is at Shaleslip Manor. Mrs. Royse stayed with her last night, and this morning we removed her to our home.
When will you bring her here?
I can bring her this afternoon if you think you can be ready for her.
I have the perfect room for her. All it needs is a little dusting. Send her things from the cottage and bring her as soon as possible.
Mr. Green, rendered speechless by his emotions, clutched his wife's hand and nodded enthusiastically.
You are good people. I knew coming to you was the right decision. I will bring Daisy later this afternoon.
Mr. Royse said his farewells and, with his purpose complete, got on his horse and returned with a lighter heart to Shaleslip Manor.
This is Shaleslip's newest colt.
Charlie, a young, heroic groom at Shaleslip, told Daisy as he guided her hand to the animal's velvety nose. Daisy ran her hand up to the colt's forehead and played with the soft tuft of mane between his ears. The colt nuzzled her, catching her unawares, and she stepped back. Then she stretched out her hand and came forward again. The colt licked her fingers.
He sure kisses nice,
Daisy said as the colt nuzzled against her again.
He likes you.
He thinks I am his mamma.
He does not have a mamma.
Charlie immediately realized his blunder and cursed himself. Everyone at the manor knew Mr. Goss had died last night. Mrs. Royse had charged Charlie with keeping Daisy entertained for an hour or two, with the strict injunction that he was not to remind her of her father's death.
What I mean to say is, when he was born...
It is all right, Charlie. He will learn to get along by himself. My mamma died, and I learned. Now, my papa is gone too. He was sick for a long time. Did you know he was sick even before my mamma died?
No, I did not know that,
Charlie said cautiously.
I knew my papa was going to die, even though he told me he would stay with me forever. I didn't want to lose him, but I didn't want him to be in pain anymore. So, the last time I was with him, I told him it was all right with me if he wanted to go to Mama. I miss him already, though I am glad he is no longer suffering. Is that bad of me?
No, it is not bad of you. No one wants a loved one to suffer.
It still hurts to know he is gone, even worse than it hurt losing Mama.
I am sorry, Daisy. I know this must be hard, but you have a lot of friends, and Mr. and Mrs. Royse will take care of you.
And I still have Grandpapa. Without him, I would despair.
Charlie opened his mouth to reply, but he was at a loss for words. From what he had heard, having old Mr. Goss for a grandfather was in itself a reason to despair. Just then, the colt whinnied, and Volo, Shaleslip's grandest stallion, answered from a nearby stall. Daisy cocked her head.
Papa taught me all about horses. Take that one, for instance.
She pointed in Volo's direction.
He has a good build and strong legs. He must run as fast as the wind.
He does indeed. How did you know that?
I can hear him stomping around in his stall. Over there, that horse is very gentle and old.
Daisy pointed at Goldie, an old gelding that had been Mr. Royse's 8th birthday present many, many years ago.
That is remarkable. You really know a lot about horses for a...
For a what?
Charlie hesitated, so Daisy answered for him.
You meant to say for a blind girl, did you not?
I'm sorry. I don't know why I even thought it. You are no different from any other girl.
Of course I'm not. Papa taught me how to ride too. And if I know what time it is, I can tell directions by feeling the sun on my face.
Charlie thought this was rather impressive, as his own sisters did not know east from west.
That is an excellent skill to have. But what do you do on cloudy days?
I listen for the church bells or the blacksmith's hammer. Or, if I am in the woods, I feel for moss on the trees.
You are quite resourceful,
Charlie said, and he thought it high praise indeed for a girl, blind or otherwise.
Thank you, Charlie. I want others to learn that about me also, especially now that Papa is gone. I want people to know that even though I am blind, I am not helpless. I am perfectly able to do everything other girls my age can do.
I'll bet you are. Well, that's the last of the baby animals. I'd better take you back to the house now. I promised Mrs. Royse I would have you back in 2 hours.
Thank you for showing me the animals, Charlie. I loved holding and petting them.
Charlie walked ahead of Daisy, leading her back inside by the sound of his footsteps. When they arrived in the kitchen, Mr. Belfast had just finished baking sweet rolls and tea cakes. Instead of leaving Daisy in the kitchen and going directly back to the stables, Charlie stood beside her, shifting from foot to foot. He took deep breaths, basking in the sweet aroma of cinnamon and honey. He was about to leave reluctantly when he caught Mr. Belfast watching him from the corner of his eye as he pulled the sweet rolls apart. Charlie swallowed and stood stiff with an air of readiness as Mr. Belfast arranged the sweets on elegant dessert plates.
I see you there, Charlie,
Mr. Belfast said as he poured the honey glaze over the hot, sweet rolls.
Did you take good care of Miss Daisy?
Yes, sir, and brought her back at the exact time Mrs. Royse requested.
Well, that deserves a reward, I think. Get a plate from the shelf over there and bring it here. Get one for Daisy too. I would wager you like sweet rolls too. Do you not, Miss Daisy?
I do,
Daisy exclaimed. She could hardly believe her luck. To have sweet rolls twice in 1 week. If only she could take one to Papa. Charlie retrieved the plates with haste, holding them out for Mr. Belfast to fill.
Now take them over there and eat them quickly so you can return to your duties, young man.
Thank you, Mr. Belfast.
Charlie guided Daisy to a table in the corner where they would be in no one's way. They devoured their treats and were licking the crumbs off their fingers when Daniel entered, searching for Daisy.
There you are. Mrs. Royse is asking for you. Go put your plate in the sink and come with me.
I'll get the plates,
Charlie said, jumping up with alacrity.
Don't you huff at me, Miss Daisy. I know you can do it, but you're a guest, and guests at Shaleslip Manor don't take their own plates to the sink.
He said the last with a withering look at Daniel, who he thought should know better, being the second footman and all. Daniel stuck out his tongue at the stable boy, scooped Daisy into his arms, and carried her delightfully squealing up the stairs to Mrs. Royse. Marjorie and Gregory were sitting together in the library when Daniel arrived and deposited a giggling Daisy at the door. It warmed Marjorie's heart and amazed her to see Daisy laughing so soon after her heartbreak.
Daisy, there you are. Come here. Mr. Royse and I have something to tell you.
Marjorie took Daisy's hand and led her to the settee.
Did Mr. Royse find Grandpapa? Is he here? Oh, I just knew he would come for me, especially now that Papa is...
Daisy stopped, unable to say the word.
No, dearest, your grandfather is not here. Mr. Royse found him, but he is not coming for you.
Will Mr. Royse take me to live with him, then?
No, I am afraid not,
Gregory said.
His home is unsuitable for raising a child. He prefers for you to live somewhere else.
Gregory had tried to soften his tone, but he could see that his words hurt her.
Somewhere else? But where? I have nowhere else to go. No, you must be mistaken. Grandpapa is all alone, and so am I. We need each other.
It seems your grandfather does not see it that way. He is a stubborn, bitter man who is still angry at your father for rejecting him all those years ago. He says he has no son or granddaughter.
No matter how gently he spoke the words, he knew they would come as a blow, and he stiffened when she began to cry.
I have found a wonderful family who wants you. You will have a lovely home with them.
I cannot live with people I do not know. Why does Grandpapa not want me?
You must not think of it that way,
Marjorie said.
It is not that he does not want you. You see, he has been living a strange life, all alone.
That should not matter. I am his granddaughter. He should love me even if he loves nobody else.
Yes, darling, that's true. But you know you cannot make someone love you if they do not want to. Mr. Royse has talked to the Greens in Shalebury. Their daughter died when she was very little, and ever since they have been wishing for another. They want you to come live with them. They will love you and give you a proper home. You will even have a brother. Is that not right, Mr. Royse?
Yes, his name is Edmund. He is a year or two older than you, the perfect age for an older brother.
I know who the Greens are, and I know Edmund. I do not want him as my brother. He teases me and pulls my braids in church. I hate him. I just want Grandpapa.
Daisy cried, burying her face in her hands.
I am sure once you get to know Edmund a little better, you will be very fond of him,
Marjorie said.
You know, I always wanted a brother, but I never had one.
Maybe Edmund can be your brother then. I prefer to go live with Grandpapa.
Daisy, that cannot be. Edmund will be your new brother, and Mr. and Mrs. Green will be wonderful foster parents. You will have everything you will ever need. Mr. Royse is taking you there this afternoon.
But I do not want to live with them. I refuse to live with anyone except Grandpapa. It's what Papa wanted.
Daisy stood up and tried to leave the room, but Marjorie stopped her with a gentle hand on her shoulder.
Daisy, you must understand your grandfather cannot care for you properly. He lives in a dank, dirty cellar. That is no place to raise a little girl.
Grandpapa is all alone. I could help him. I could cook and sew for him. I am very good at mending shirts. Mama taught me before she died.
Daisy, you need to listen to me. Do you trust Mr. Royse and me?
Yes.
Her tone and expression were sullen, her shoulders slumping in defeat.
I must insist that you give the Greens a chance. They will be very good to you. Please at least try for a little while.
For how long?
Until Michaelmas. Is that fair enough?
Very well,
Daisy agreed with tears streaming down her face.
I will make you a promise,
Gregory said.
The annual Shaleslip May Day celebration is 3 days hence. If you are a good girl until then, I will make sure Mr. and Mrs. Green bring you to the celebration. Do not you think that will be fun?
Yes, sir, I am sure it will be splendid.
The languid tone of Daisy's voice broke Marjorie's heart. They had worn her down and defeated her. This poor child who had lost everyone dear to her now had a broken spirit. Chapter 6. No sooner had Gregory opened the door to Mr. Green's shop that afternoon than Mrs. Green hastened to him, exclaiming over her shoulder to her husband and son in the back room,
"She is here! She is here!"
Mrs. Green then went to Daisy and dropped to her knees in front of her.
I am so happy you are here, Daisy. Why, I could hardly wait for you to arrive. This will be your home now, and I am so glad to have you.
Mr. Green and Edmund came out of the back room and joined Mrs. Green in welcoming Daisy to their home.
I am Mr. Green. You don't have to worry about a thing anymore. We will take good care of you. This is our boy, Edmund.
We are very pleased to have you here, Daisy,
Edmund said, though he sounded as though he did not entirely believe it.
Thank you,
Daisy answered solemnly.
Supper will be served soon. I hope you like chicken pie.
Daisy did not respond. Mrs. Green chose not to notice and said,
Edmund, please take Daisy upstairs to her room and help her unpack her things so she can get settled.
Yes, Mamma,
Edmund said, accepting Daisy's valise from Mr. Royse.
Come on, follow me.
Edmund carried the bag in one hand and gently guided Daisy with the other. Mr. Royse and the Greens watched until the children were out of sight.
She is a little shy, but I'm sure she'll feel right at home in no time,
Gregory said.
I am sure she will. Perhaps she will find it easier to talk to Edmund than us, since he is closer to her in age,
Mrs. Green said.
That may well be the case. I want to thank you again for fostering Daisy.
There is no need for that. It is our pleasure. In all honesty, Mr. Royse, you are doing us a favour. For far too long we have wanted a girl, and now you have given us such a beautiful one. We will cherish and love her as if she were our own flesh and blood.
I am sure you will.
Mr. Royse and the Greens talked for another 10 minutes until Edmund and Daisy returned.
All of Daisy's things are put away.
Good. Daisy, how do you like your room?
Mrs. Green asked.
I like it well enough.
I am sure once you have spent time in it, you will love it. It will become a haven for you,
Gregory said, hoping Daisy's lack of enthusiasm would not upset her new family.
Mrs. Royse and I will visit you often to see how you are getting along. Also, do not forget about the May Day celebration. Many local families will be there. You are bound to have fun and make new friends.
Thank you, Mr. Royse. It sounds lovely,
Daisy responded blandly. Gregory eyed her speculatively. Blind since birth, the child had no concept of masking her emotions by schooling her facial expressions. In short, Daisy was an open book. At the moment, all he could read in her was resignation. He stayed a little longer until he deemed it safe to excuse himself and return to Shaleslip, leaving Daisy in the capable and loving hands of her new family.
Daisy,
Edmund shouted as he exited the back of his father's store the next morning.
Daisy, where are you?
He entered the barn, where they kept the cart and pony, and found her stroking the pony's nose, much to the animal's delight.
There you are. I have been looking everywhere for you. Did you not hear me calling for you?
I heard you. In fact, I bet half of Shaleslip heard you.
Why did you not answer me then?
Daisy shrugged in reply.
How did you get all the way out here by yourself?
I walked. I am not helpless, you know.
I never said you were.
Maybe not with words, but you say it in many other ways. Everyone here treats me like a baby, just because I cannot see. That's why I want to go live with Grandpapa.
We are not treating you like a baby. We are trying to show you where everything is, so you can feel at home.
What if I do not want to feel at home?
Why would you say such a thing?
I want to be with Grandpapa.
Grandpapa this, Grandpapa that. Why are you always talking about him?
Because he needs me. I want somebody to need me, instead of it always being the other way around.
Well, you would not enjoy living with him. I heard about him. He sounds terrible.
Take that back. He is not terrible.
Sure he is. I heard he is a dirty old recluse with a scraggly beard.
Daisy lashed out and landed an open-hand slap on Edmund's cheek.
Hey, why did you hit me?
Take it back,
Daisy yelled.
He is not a dirty old recluse with a scraggly beard, and I can prove it to you.
How?
Come with me to Braselton Manor, and I will show you.
Nobody but ghosts live at Braselton Manor. The place burnt down a long time ago.
No, it did not. Papa told me that is where Grandpapa lives, and Mr. Royse spoke to him there 2 days ago.
I am telling you, he cannot live there. The house is in shambles. No one could live in it.
I do not believe you. Take me there so I can see it for myself.
Edmund hesitated and Daisy pressed on.
You are afraid, you coward. That is why you will not take me to Braselton Manor.
Don't be daft. I am not scared. Braselton is miles away. Papa would cane us both for going there alone.
You are scared of an old recluse. You are scared of a little journey. You are scared of your papa. You are just plain scared.
I'll show you who is scared.
Edmund saddled the pony, climbed into the saddle, and pulled Daisy up behind him.
Hold on tight,
he said, as he kicked the old pony and turned her towards Brassington. It took a full 4 hours to reach Braselton Manor on the slow pony. The two runaways bickered the whole way, but they managed to make it there without killing each other. They left the pony hitched to what was left of the old manor gate and made their way down the overgrown drive.
What is it?
Daisy asked when Edmund stopped suddenly.
What do you see?
There's nothing but old statues left standing. There is no house. It's all burnt out and ruined, just like I told you. Come on, Daisy, let's go back.
No,
Daisy said as she took a few steps towards the old manor.
Hold on, let me help you. There are piles of rubble everywhere.
Edmund guided Daisy around wild brambles and crumbling fountains to the manor house ruins.
Do you see Grandpapa?
I see no one. I think we had better start back.
No, I need to find him. Grandpapa!
Daisy shouted as she held her arms out in front of her and walked towards where the manor had once stood. She stumbled over a pile of rocks and then felt along the top with her hands.
What is this?
Daisy asked Edmund.
I don't know. A garden wall, perhaps. I told you, the whole place is in ruins.
You may have been right about that, but Grandpapa is here somewhere. Grandpapa!
She shouted again. The wind picked up and moaned through the blackened columns of the house. Edmund looked up and shivered.
Daisy, we have to get away from this place. I can hear the ghost of the Duchess.
What are you talking about?
Haven't you heard? Braselton Manor is haunted. I hear the ghost coming for us.
I hear nothing,
Daisy insisted, though anxiety crinkled her brow.
Stop being so cowardly.
What are you children doing here? Get out.
Mr. Goss shouted from the top of the cellar stairs.
Go on, get out, I said.
Edmund recoiled and backed away on wobbly legs. From his perspective, the old man had popped out of the ground like a corpse rising from the grave. A very hairy corpse with a shotgun.
Grandpapa, is that you?
Daisy asked, shrugging off Edmund's grasping hands and turning towards the sound of the voice.
I am no one's grandpapa. Now leave before I tie you up with the rabbits.
He held up a snare with his left hand, a dead rabbit dangling from the end.
Get out of here, I said.
He left the cellar and advanced on the children with a menacing glare.
Come on, Daisy, we need to leave,
Edmund urged, tugging on her arm.
No, I want to stay here with Grandpapa.
You do not want to stay with him. He really is dirty and hairy, and angry. Furious, in fact. Please, Daisy, we must go. He is coming this way.
I told you two to get out of here.
Mr. Goss roared. Then he lifted his shotgun and fired into the air. The sound echoed through the ruins. Daisy screamed and fell, pulled off balance by Edmund's insistent tugging. Edmund screamed too, convinced Daisy was dead, shot by her own grandfather. He took off running across the ruins to where they had left the old pony. Without looking back, he gathered the reins and leapt into the saddle, urging the pony down the Brassington road as fast as it would go. Nonplussed, Daisy listened to him gallop away.
He really is a coward,
she muttered.
Do not you have ears? I told you to get out of here.
Daisy stood and felt her way along the wall towards the sound of her grandfather's voice.
But, Grandpapa, I want to stay with you.
I told you I am not your grandpapa, and I do not want you here. Go on, run after the boy. You can still catch him.
Daisy shook her head, knowing it was too late.
Turn around, he is behind you.
Daisy sighed and turned around. She took 2 steps and then tripped over another pile of rocks and fell.
Grandpapa, you will have to help me. I cannot see where to go.
Her pronouncement was met by silence.
Mr. Royse, I am sorry for disturbing you.
Mr. Green said anxiously when Mr. Jones showed him into Gregory's study.
There is no need to apologize. But why have you come? Is something wrong with Daisy?
That is precisely why I am here. This morning, Edmund and Daisy got it into their heads to go searching for Mr. Goss at Braselton Manor. They took the pony, and Edmund returned half an hour ago. Alone.
Alone?
Gregory repeated, shocked.
He says they found Mr. Goss at the manor ruins. He fired a shotgun, and Edmund panicked. He took the pony and left Daisy behind. He thought she'd been shot, but when I calmed him and questioned him more closely, he remembered Mr. Goss had been pointing the shotgun up and away from them. She is probably perfectly fine and fit to strangle Edmund for leaving her stranded at the ruins. I am going after her, and I have come to ask if you can spare a man to come with me in case of trouble.
I will do better than that. I will go with you myself.
10 minutes later, Gregory, Mr. Green, Mr. Thatcher, and Mr. Scott set out after Daisy. They rode hard and fast, pushing their horses to their limits to make it to Braselton Manor before dark. When they arrived, the place appeared deserted.
Daisy!
Mr. Royse shouted.
Daisy, where are you?
Mr. Green called.
I am here,
cried a weeping voice. They turned towards the ruins to see a mud-splattered little girl in a torn dress emerge from behind a half-crumbled garden wall.
Thank the Lord you are safe,
Mr. Green said, embracing her.
You are freezing. Here, take my coat.
Mr. Green removed his coat and wrapped it around Daisy. Her little arms were lost in the huge sleeves, and the coat hung past her knees, but it was warm, and she relished the comfort. Mr. Green picked her up and carried her back to the horses.
He did not want me,
she sniffled.
My grandpapa saw me, and still he did not want me. He left me here alone. Does nobody want me?
I want you, Daisy. So does Mrs. Green. We have been praying to God to give us a daughter. We want you ever so badly. I know it will take adjustments for all of us, but please say you will stay and be part of our family.
But why does Grandpapa not want me? I am his own flesh and blood. He would not even listen and let me explain.
That is not a question I can answer. Sometimes people choose to live their life cut off from others. Your grandfather is one of those people. It is best not to dwell on what you have learnt, but to remember the good things your papa told you about him. Maybe someday you will have another chance to meet him, and he will be ready to listen.
Daniel held Daisy while Mr. Green mounted his horse, waiting to pass her up to him.
I remember you,
Daisy said when she felt Daniel's broad shoulders and strong arms around her.
You do?
Yes, this is the third time you have carried me.
You are right. Now, up you go with Papa Green.
Daniel lifted Daisy up and helped Mr. Green get her settled on the saddle in front of him.
Papa Green?
Daisy repeated.
I like the way it sounds. Mr. Green, may I call you that?
I would be honoured.
The rescue party turned their horses towards home and set a pace that would get them back to Shalebury in good time. Daisy was soon sound asleep, lulled by the constant motion and the warmth and comfort of her Papa Green's embrace. Mr. Goss remained hidden in a little copse of trees as the 4 riders approached the manor and called out to the little girl. He was actually happy to see that nosy toff and his 2 hulking gorillas. For hours he had crouched in the copse, keeping a close eye on Daisy to make certain she came to no harm. He was relieved when her rescuers came before nightfall. He had thought he might be forced to bring the girl into the cellar for the night, a terrifying prospect for the both of them, to be sure. He strained to hear what was being said. A pang of longing shot through his chest when Daisy begged to know why he did not love and want her. It was not true. He had loved her from the moment that nosy toff had told him of her existence. He just did not know how to show it. He had avoided human contact for so long that he could not remember how it was done. Seeing her had felt almost like a physical blow. Paul must be dead, or she would not have come. She was nearly the same age as his son had been when he had first met him, and she was stubborn as a mule, a trait shared by all the Gosses, especially Paul. Her features were a heartbreaking mix of memories. His son's colouring, his sister's eyes and cheekbones, his wife's nose and chin. God rest her soul. How he had loved her. How he had loved them all. He wished he could raise her and prove how much he loved his family. The very act could have given him redemption for all of his past wrongs, for failing to protect his sister, for failing to bring her murderer to justice, and especially for abandoning his wife and son. All these years, he had regretted not enduring the distrust and scorn of others for their sake. He should have done it for them. He should have done it for himself. After so many years of being wronged by people and events outside of his control, he had allowed it to continue even when he had control. He dearly wanted to step up now, to stand up for himself and his granddaughter. But what kind of guardian would he be? What use was an old man with no home and no fortune? Even if he wanted to, he could not care for her. He could barely care for himself. He had no business raising a child. No, it was better to let her go. Let her think he did not love her. It was better to let her begin a new life with a family who could offer her what he could not. It was better for both of them. He repeated all this to himself as he crept from the trees to catch one last glimpse of the girl, and he thought he believed it. But then, why did he ache as if the men had ridden off carrying the last piece of his heart?
You found her. Praise the Lord. I have been praying all afternoon. How is she?
Mrs. Green cried as she ran out of the shop towards her husband. Mr. Green offered his wife a condensed version of events. As he finished, he said,
She has an amazing amount of fortitude. We came to an agreement on our way home. I am to be Papa Green. If you are persuasive enough, she might consent to call you Mama Green.
I would like that,
Mrs. Green said. Daisy stirred to wakefulness as Mr. Green lifted her from the saddle into his wife's arms.
Come here, Poppet.
Mrs. Green pulled Daisy into a hug.
You can have a wonderful life with us if you give us a chance. Even though you have only been with us a short time, we cannot imagine our life without you. Please say you will stay with us. We will help you overcome the grief of your father's death and help you be happy again.
I just want to be needed, Mrs. Green.
We do need you, Daisy,
Mrs. Green said, and Daisy believed it when she felt a warm tear splash on her forehead.
We need you very much.
Do you think Grandpapa will ever love me? Even if I cannot live with him, I should like to know him a little.
Let us give him some time to get used to the idea, and then perhaps we can try to contact him again. By then, he may be a little more receptive to an introduction and the chance to know you,
Mrs. Green said.
That's what Papa Green said. If you both think it, then it must be right.
Daisy hugged Mrs. Green again. Chapter 7. Shaleslip Manor was picturesque, decorated for May Day as it was. The weather cooperated in magnificent fashion, with warm sunshine and a cloudless blue sky. The women discarded their shawls and lounged on blankets spread on the lawn, or mingled near the tents, offering appetizing refreshments from Shaleslip Manor's kitchens. Many begged Mr. Belfast for his recipes, but he steadfastly refused to give them up. The men lingered close to the pond, where various competitive games testing skill, strength, or luck were arranged. Those who had already engaged in the strenuous activities discarded their jackets and rolled up their shirt sleeves as they cheered on the other participants. Tables and chairs from the house were set up near the small country orchestra so tea and cakes could be served in full view of the merriment. At the far side of the green was another set of tables for the men who preferred ale over tea. The maypole at the centre of the green waited for the young men to take a pretty partner and dance around it, its bright-coloured ribbons fluttering in the slight breeze. The children of Shaleslip Manor tenants and Shalebury villagers ran three-legged races and hopped about in flour sacks like jackrabbits in a meadow. The magnificent celebration was the first May Day Daisy had attended since her mother's death. Never had she experienced such frivolity. Edmund stayed steadfastly by her side, guiding her through whatever activity she tried. When they entered the three-legged race, their first attempt was a dismal failure. Daisy had trouble matching Edmund's rhythm and tripped over a rock that would not have toppled any contestant but a blind one. The children ridiculed her and pitied Edmund for being stuck with her as a partner. One boy even made Daisy cry.
Hey, Edmund, why don't you plant her in the field? She's already as blind as a stump.
Shut your mouth, George. Daisy is my new sister, and I'll not have you speaking ill of her.
You won't, huh? Well, how do you propose to stop me?
Like this!
Edmund lunged at George, punching him right in his impertinent mouth. George, who was older, bigger, and not at all accustomed to anyone standing up to him, stood in shock for a moment before he roared in rage and tackled Edmund about the midsection. The two boys toppled to the ground and rolled in the grass for a few minutes, the other children gathering around them in a circle to cheer them on before the adults could make it over and split up the brawlers.
What's going on here?
Mr. Green said as he pulled Edmund off George.
Nothing, sir.
Edmund and George said in unison.
It does not look like nothing. George here has a fat lip. Now, Edmund, tell me what this is about, or I'll send you home immediately.
Edmund bowed his head but confessed nothing.
Very well then, off you get. Start walking. I'll expect you to be home when we get there, and then the two of us will have a little talk.
Stop!
Daisy cried.
He did it for me. Some of the other boys were making fun of me because I stumbled in the race. George said something nasty and Edmund fought him to defend my honour. Please do not punish him for being a good older brother.
Mr. Green speared both boys with a piercing gaze.
Is this the truth?
Edmund and George stood silently inspecting their shoes until Edmund finally spoke.
It is, sir.
Can you promise there will be no more fighting today?
Edmund looked up at his father and said,
I'll promise if he promises not to say anything bad about my sister. Otherwise, I'll crack him in the face again, and I will not feel one bit sorry for it.
Secretly, Mr. Green was proud of his son, but for the audience's sake, he asked,
What do you say, George? Are you going to tease Daisy any further?
No, sir, I learned my lesson.
Very well. Shake hands on it.
The two boys did not shake hands so much as try to crush each other's fingers. Then Edmund grabbed Daisy's hand and pulled her back to the start of the race.
Daisy, let's try this again. This time, put your arm around my waist, and I'll do the same with you. I can help hold you up and guide you around the obstacles. Also, I'll call out right and left so you know which foot to move. Let's see if we can win this thing and prove George is an imbecile.
I am sorry I called you a coward, Edmund. You are a brave boy, after all.
The second race began, and this time, the outcome was quite different. Daisy explicitly trusted Edmund to be her eyes and lead her through the race course safe and sound. She perfectly matched his running rhythm, and they stayed near the front of the pack, landing them at the finish line in second place. No May Day in the history of all her years in Shalebury had been so pleasurable to Mrs. Green as this one. Watching her son and new daughter brought tremendous joy to her, especially when she heard Edmund say,
With more practice, I'd wager we could take first. We'll be unbeatable next year, Daisy.
Daisy had several small victories after that. She made friends with a few Shalebury girls who asked if they could visit her, and the schoolmaster encouraged her to attend lessons with Edmund. Daisy had long dreamt of attending school, but her father had preferred educating her at home. For Marjorie's part, her first Shaleslip Manor May Day was turning out better than she had dared to hope. Mr. Baxter came with his two older children and showered Marjorie with thanks for visiting his wife.
Your visits are all she's talked about for days. Well, when she's not talking about the baby, that is. She was so upset when we heard that Mr. Goss had died, but she is thankful you could help him through his last days.
Marjorie gave him a sad smile and shook her head.
It is Mrs. Baxter who deserves the thanks, for had she not reminded me of my duty, I would not have remembered it myself. Please give her my sincere gratitude. But how are she and little Marjan? Are they well?
They are both doing very well. Marjan has a healthy set of lungs, I tell you. We're lucky she's so good-natured most times. When she gets to screaming, well, I'm surprised you haven't heard her up at the Great House.
Marjorie laughed and promised to visit again soon. Then she sent him and his children towards the tables full of sweets and urged them to eat as much as possible and take some home for Mrs. Baxter. As they walked away, she noticed a shabbily dressed man approaching the green. She watched warily as he neared. When she saw he carried a shotgun, she sought Gregory in a circle of men and brought the man to his attention.
Welcome to Shaleslip Manor, Mr. Goss.
Gregory said as he approached the recluse, who had stopped to watch his granddaughter in the distance. He was surprised to see the man had bathed and made some attempt to wash his clothes and tame his hair and beard.
Do not give me welcome, Mr. Royse. I do not want any part of your world. Do you understand me?
Then why are you here?
My granddaughter. I came here to speak with her, and you cannot stop me.
I have no wish to stop you. You are the one who stopped yourself when you declared you wanted nothing to do with Daisy. If you have changed your mind, I will call her over so you can speak with her, but I must insist you not upset her. She has had a trying week with the death of her father and is now adapting to a new home and family.
I will not upset her. I just want to speak with her. I got to thinking after your lot cleared out of Brazelton. That little girl is all I have in the world, and if there's any good left in me, I'm giving it to her. Call her over here, please.
He added grudgingly, seeing Gregory's raised eyebrow.
I do not want to go near the other urchins.
Gregory nodded to Marjorie, who crossed the green to the children playing by the maypole. She returned with Daisy, Mr. and Mrs. Green trailing a few steps behind her.
Grandpapa, where are you?
Daisy asked when Marjorie urged her forward with a hand on the small of her back. Mr. Goss did not speak, but thumped the butt of his shotgun on the ground. Daisy went to him with outstretched arms.
Grandpapa, I am so glad you came,
she said, wrapping her small arms around his waist and hugging him tight. Mr. Goss patted her back with a stiff hand, hardly knowing how to react. After a moment, he pulled away from her grasp and reached into his pocket.
This is for you,
he said, handing Daisy a clumsily made wooden trinket box. Daisy accepted it, turning it over in her hands and smelling it. Then she pulled off the lid and felt the contents.
It is a necklace,
she said, holding it up and feeling the cameo hanging from the gold chain.
It was my sister's favourite. I found it in the ruins of Brazelton Manor after she died. I want you to have it.
Thank you, Grandpapa. I will cherish it forever.
She wrapped her arms around him again and rested her head against his stomach.
It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen.
The most beautiful thing you have ever seen? Why, you cannot see anything, child,
Mr. Goss responded, confused.
But I can, Grandpapa. I see it in my mind.
Daisy looked up, unseeing, at her grandfather with the biggest smile he had ever seen spread over her angelic face.
And can you see me, child?
He asked, kneeling before her. Daisy felt his arms, then his shoulders, until finally she traced his face with her fingertips.
Yes, Grandpapa, I can see you. I love you very much.
Mr. Goss knelt there for a long time, and then a single tear fell from the corner of his eye. The tear trailed down his wrinkled cheek and disappeared into his beard as he choked out in a raspy whisper.
And I love you, child.
Come see the maypole, Grandpapa. You can describe it to me.
Daisy pulled him to his feet and urged him to follow her.
This is no place for me, Daisy. I'm a crotchety old recluse. I just came to give you that necklace and ask you...
What? What would you ask of me?
I wonder if you would allow me to visit you once in a while in your new home.
I would like that. Will you come every week?
Every week?
He exclaimed with a laugh.
Why, your new family would surely be sick of me.
Certainly not.
Mr. Green spoke up and stepped forward.
You will always be welcome.
Mr. Goss looked at Daisy's new father, appraising him from boots to hat before he said,
It is a long walk from Brazelton Manor. I will visit you once a month while the weather holds. Let us begin with that and see how we get on together.
Mr. Green smiled and offered an outstretched hand to Mr. Goss, who accepted it with little hesitation.
I suppose that is fine, though I wish I could see you every week.
Daisy huffed.
Please, will you come and see the maypole before you go?
Very well. Let us have a look at this maypole.
And maybe stay a little while and eat?
Mrs. Royse dared to ask as Mr. Goss allowed Daisy to pull him towards the festivities. Mr. Goss looked at the tables, groaning under the weight of more fine food than he had seen in his lifetime.
If you insist,
he grumbled, making a show of reluctance that fooled no one. Epilogue. Dusk was settling over the horizon in red and orange bursts of brilliance as a piece of Marjorie's heart rode off in the last cart to leave Shaleslip Manor. Marjorie waved to Daisy, who was wrapped securely in the loving arms of Mrs. Green. Marjorie was happy for Daisy. The child who had lost so much and was devastated just yesterday now had a loving family, complete with a gruff yet doting grandfather. She dropped her hand and stepped inside the house when the cart crested the little hill and drove out of sight. She found Gregory in the library, finishing Delphine in the same leather lounger she had found him in nearly a week ago. Gregory set aside his book and opened his arms to her. She went to him and sat upon his lap, laying her wind-rustled curls against his shoulder.
The celebration was a success, my dear. I do not think Shaleslip Manor has experienced such a festive May Day these past 20 years.
Gregory wrapped his arms around her and kissed her forehead. He then moved his mouth to her ear and whispered,
You have brought merriment and happiness to Shaleslip Manor and to me.
You have likewise brought me unimaginable happiness. I never dreamt of having such a happy life as I do here with you, nor had I dreamt of being in such a position of responsibility.
You are handling it all with aplomb. Your self-confidence and assurance are contagious to the entire house. Shaleslip Manor has never run as efficiently as under your even-tempered guidance.
Careful, Gregory, your praise will go to my head.
I doubt that,
Gregory answered, pulling her tighter against him and kissing her again.
I am glad the celebration went off without a hitch. I feared it would not after such tragedy.
I had no such fear. I was confident you would handle everything. And I was right. But I noticed you were melancholy as our guests were leaving. How are you now?
I confess I am concerned for Daisy. I feel guilty for pushing her off on others so soon after her father's death. Perhaps she should have stayed with us longer. Mr. and Mrs. Green seem to show her genuine love. But will she accept it?
I know you are concerned for her. But think about it this way. If Daisy had stayed here and become more attached to you, it would have been harder for her to leave when the time came. It is best she attaches herself to her new family right from the start. Another week together would be not only hard on her but too hard for you as well. I know you, and you would not want her to go.
You are right, of course. Even so, I worry about her.
I know you do. Your care and concern is a testament to your own goodness.
I am not as good as I could be.
Marjorie sighed and settled deeper into his arms. Gregory tightened his hold on her and kissed her forehead once again.
It has been a long day. Tell me, did you eat? Or did you spend the entire day seeing to the needs of others?
Yes, I ate. I suspect I ate far too much. I was roasting hot and absolutely nauseous once and had to take a seat until it passed.
Do you want me to have peppermint tea brought in? Perhaps it will calm your stomach.
No, I am fine now. I would prefer to just sit here and relax with you.
Well then, let us move to the more comfortable sofa. Shall we read Wordsworth together?
That sounds delightful.
Marjorie retrieved the book while Gregory moved to the sofa. He sat in the corner, the arm of the sofa supporting his back and one leg thrown over the cushions. Marjorie returned with the book and settled between his legs, leaning her back against his strong chest. She pulled a soft blanket over their legs before opening the tome and reading aloud to her husband. Gregory wrapped his arms around Marjorie, resting his hands on her stomach while he listened to the sweet music that was her voice. He drank in the scent of her hair, her perfume, and the wildness of the fresh Derbyshire air she had spent most of the day enjoying.
Dear God, how I love her,
he prayed silently.
She has so much to give. Please grant us a child of our own.
The end.